I come today with good news, the gospel of tragic optimism, according to Viktor Frankl. Frankl would say that our first principle of Unitarian Universalism, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, falls far short of the mark and the reality. In addition to worth and dignity, every life has unconditional meaning under all circumstances. The motivating force of our life is our will to discover that meaning. And we have the freedom not only to seek meaning, but to embrace the meaning and to live our lives in service of it. When we do this, we transcend ourselves, and that can never be taken from us, can never be undone. Everyone's meaning and purpose are different, unique, and situational, as you heard Frankl say, but there are some common paths to meaning, and we'll explore those today. The second source of wisdom in our faith is words and deeds of prophetic people, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. Dr. Viktor Frankl was such a prophetic person. He belonged to the Jewish faith, and he started practicing medicine, neurology, and psychiatry in Austria in 1930. He quickly made a name for himself, was something of a prodigy in the field. And in parallel, Hitler's regime was rising. For a time, Frankl's prominence kept him and his family safe. He tells of being summoned to the office of an SS officer. But instead of being arrested there as he feared, the SS officer asked Frankl for some psychiatric advice for a friend, not for himself, because SS officers have their lives totally together and do not need therapy. But the SS officer's friend apparently had quite a few issues. And so Frankl provided him therapeutic services for over a year, which Frankl credits as buying his family a little more time. But it wasn't enough time. And Frankl ultimately spent years in 4 concentration camps, and all of his family members, except for one sister who was on another continent, died. He survived, and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning immediately afterward in 9 days in 1945. A 1991 Library of Congress survey found Man's Search for Meaning to be one of the 10 most influential books in America. Viktor Frankl died in 1997 at 92 years old. His life in the concentration camps, well, that's perhaps the most extreme example of having to find meaning through the attitude taken towards unavoidable suffering. But the problem that he studied and devoted his life to, the problem of meaninglessness and existential despair, that arises every day. It exists perhaps more often than it does not. And Frankl knew this even before he spent time in the camps. He had been studying what drove people to existential despair and suicide before his incarceration. After his liberation, he returned to this theme, having catalyzed the heart of his theory from his experiences in the camps. He developed a type of existential psychotherapy called logotherapy, the premise of which is that striving to find meaning in life is the primary motivational force in people. And this was a really big idea, very different from Sigmund Freud's idea that we are motivated by a desire to seek pleasure, or Adler's idea that we are motivated by a desire to seek power. The goal of logotherapy is to assist the patient in finding meaning in his, her, or their lives. Today, we see aspects of this kind of therapy in the popular cognitive behavioral therapy and narrative therapies that are more prevalent now. But I would bet that Viktor Frankl would say that meaninglessness is an especially pronounced problem in America, even and maybe most among those above the poverty level. In 1962, for example, Frankl wrote, "A statistical survey revealed that among my European students, 25% showed a more or less marked degree of existential vacuum. Among my American students, it was not 25, but 60%. Frankl explains his term for meaninglessness, the existential vacuum, like this. He says, there's a double-fold loss that comes from living in the 20th century. First, people have lost a lot of their animal instincts that used to regulate behavior. And now people have to make choices, so many choices all the time. And second, traditions, religious, cultural, societal, familial, traditions that had embedded values are rapidly disappearing. Those values had previously guided a lot of the innumerable choices that we face. So now, no tradition tells a person what to do, and no tradition tells him what he ought to do. Sometimes he doesn't even know what he wishes to do. Instead, he wishes to do what other people tell him to do, conformism, or what other people wish him to do, totalitarianism. According to Frankl, we can avoid the existential vacuum and discover meaning in 3 different ways. One, through our creative gifts, such as by creating work or doing a deed. Your vocation, raising a family, or your efforts in cultivating a relationship would all fall under this category and can be rich sources of meaning. Second, through our experience of the love for or from someone else, to be really seen and loved and to reciprocate that. Or wholehearted appreciation and joy of the good and the beautiful, like nature or art. But third, and the one that Frankl is most famous for and that we'll focus on today, is the attitude that we take towards unavoidable suffering. When we can't change a situation, we can transcend it and find meaning in our very response to it. Frankl called this attitudinal shift tragic optimism. I want to be careful to call out that Frankl didn't glorify suffering for suffering's sake. He said, let me make it perfectly clear that suffering is in no way necessary to finding meaning. I only insist that meaning is possible in spite of suffering, provided certainly that the suffering is unavoidable. Because if it were avoidable, the meaningful thing to do would be to remove its cause, be it psychological, biological, or political. To suffer unnecessarily is masochistic rather than heroic. Major places where many of us will come up against unavoidable suffering are in aging and illness. In other times and places, elders have been given honor and asked about their late in life experiences as revered fonts of wisdom. Not so much in our time and our place. Now, aging, illness, and end of life are minimized and little discussed. Our elders are not honored for what they're going through so much as they are made to feel embarrassed that they are going through it. American logotherapists hoped that Frankl's form of therapy could help with this problem of cultural shame that's put on people who are experiencing unavoidable suffering, such as those with an incurable disease or those with the terminal condition called aging. A meaning-oriented approach can help by honoring the suffering itself as fertile ground for meaning and encouraging the person suffering to feel purposeful in the way in which they are responding to their unavoidable situation. logotherapy honors the nobility possible at these times. I see this philosophy applied in my work with Hospice Austin, where we encourage people at end of life to reflect on the particulars of their experiences and integrate them into the meaning and purpose of their lives. Frankl's approach also honors aging in a way that I really find meaningful, for lack of a better word, through his emphasis on the granaries of the past. He says, for as soon as we have used an opportunity and have actualized it, we have done so once and for all. We have rescued it into the past, wherein it has been safely delivered and deposited. And in the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but rather, on the contrary, everything is irrevocably stored and treasured. To be sure, people tend to only see the stubble fields of transitoriness in their lives and overlook and forget the full granaries of the past into which they have brought the harvest of their lives, the deeds done, the loves loved, and last but not least, the sufferings they have gone through with dignity and courage. Now, from that perspective, our elders lead more meaningful lives than young people ever could, because elders have abundant granaries of the past, potentialities that they have actualized, meanings they have fulfilled, and values that they have honored and that they have lived. And nothing and no one can ever take those things away. Let me debunk a couple of common meaning and purpose myths. You don't have to save the world to have a purpose. Small things work just fine. You made a difference in the life of a child. You contributed to the building of a community. You gave of yourself to a cause greater than yourself that you believed in deeply. You helped others. And you don't have to figure everything out to be a person living with meaning and purpose. You don't have to solve the world. Your meaning and purpose, that will be unique to you. And it doesn't have to make sense to others. You may be thinking, well, Reverend Lee, I'd really like to find the meaning and purpose in my life without going through intense, unavoidable suffering. How do I know if I have found my purpose? Well, here's some questions for reflection that can point the way. What brings you joy? What strengths and gifts flow easily in you? If you had 6 months to live, what would you do with your time? If you had $5 million and you couldn't save it and you had to spend it, how would you spend it? If the answers to those questions, if they bring to mind things already present in your life, like your relationships, your work, your volunteering, or your pastimes, well, then you're likely already on meaning and on purpose in your life. If the answers point to work or experiences or people that are not present in your life, then I would explore those answers a little more, because they're probably tied up with your purpose and can help get you there. But in either case, take action just a little bit every day in line with your meaning and your purpose. Give those things of your time. What I hope you take away today is optimism. Hard things have happened to all of us, not the least of which during this pandemic. And more hard things are coming. But there are no tragic and negative aspects to life that cannot be, by the stand one takes to them, transmuted into meaningful experiences, positive accomplishments, or kickstarters of your purpose. Amen, and blessed be.